Welcome to the review video for quiz number 5 for Ezekiel class. And hopefully you will watch this video before the actual day of the review. Let me go over first of all what kind of questions you'll see on the video, on the quiz, and then we'll do the review. The first 10 questions are short answer questions, which means you have to know the answer. So pay attention very carefully to that. Then there's a few multiple choice questions. Finally, there is a matching section matching different countries like Ammon, Moab, Edom, and Philistia with different things that I told you about them. There is one essay question worth 10 points. So if you hear me talking a lot about a certain thing in this review video, it's a good chance that is the essay question. And hopefully you'll pay attention to what I say about it, all right? This quiz encompasses from Ezekiel chapter 24 all the way through up to current what we talked about in the last day that I was there, all right? All right, first let's talk about the parable of the cauldron and the death of Ezekiel's wife. And we mentioned the fact that in the 9th year, 10th month, 10th day of Israel's history, all right, the siege began. Nebuchadnezzar began sieging the city for the last time. We mentioned that very day Ezekiel's wife died. And what a sad event that must have been for him. We mentioned the fact that God told Ezekiel he was not to mourn his wife. In fact, he prophesied in the morning that his wife would die. And in the evening, his wife did die. And the Bible says he got up the next morning and did exactly what he was told to do. No crying, no mourning at all. And it really was to show the people that there would be no opportunity for them to mourn their dead. During this prophecy, he talked about, once again, the city of Jerusalem being the cauldron, the people being the flesh. This time, though, he mentioned the fact that the scum from being overboiled would boil to the top. And that idea was the fact that their wickedness would come to the top, that it would be evident to everybody that saw their judgment. Then we started talking in Ezekiel chapter 25 about the prophecy against other countries like Ammon, Moab, Edom, and Philistia. All right, so we're talking about a matching section here. All right, of course, we mentioned there were 7 different nations that God talks about the judgment, but in this chapter, only the 4 are mentioned. We mentioned the children of Ammon. Of course, they came from Lot. They were the ones that dominated the King's Highway, which was the main trade route. We mentioned the fact that part of their sin was that they were happy over the profaning of the temple. They were happy over the fall of Israel and Judah. They were very terrible in the fact that they ripped up the women with children in Gilead in order to get more property for themselves. And they inhabited some of Israel's land. We mentioned about the children of Moab. Once again, they were children of Lot as well. The Moabites were the ones that hired Balaam to curse Israel. We mentioned the fact that a famous Moabitess was Ruth. She, of course, was the great-grandmother of King David. They also were happy at Israel's decline. And one of the heinous things the Moabites did was they burned the king of Edom's bones until they turned to lime. And so they were very disrespectful to the dead. We mentioned Edom. Of course, Edom is from Esau, Jacob's brother. We mentioned about them that they also rejoiced at the profaning of the temple, mocked God's people, saying they were basically just like everybody else. It was the Edomites who came in and kind of joined with Nebuchadnezzar and helped him attack the city, and even took some of the people captives and brought them to Tyre and Philistia. The Edomites were known for their mountain fortresses and were very proud of it as well. Later on in the Edomite history, we mentioned the fact that the Edomites lost their property to the Nabateans and began taking property in southern Judah. And then we mentioned the people from Philistia, the Philistines. Of course, they were the ones that occupied the seacoast of Canaan, so they lived right there on the seacoast. We mentioned a famous Philistine, of course, Goliath, the giant. It was the Philistines that were ruled by 5 different lords. And we mentioned a kind of an odd fact that David had a group of bodyguards called the Cherethites, and they were Philistines. Kind of an odd thing. He was a Philistine killer, and yet the Philistines protected him as well. We mentioned the fact that they took revenge on Israel, and they also helped carrying away of captives. In chapter 26 and chapter 27, we talked about the fall of Tyre. And of course, the fall of Tyre was probably one of the most amazing prophecies in the Bible. We mentioned the fact that Tyre, of course, was the commercial center of the ancient world. And we mentioned the fact that when Tyre fell, all nations really got a chance to spoil her. We mentioned that Tyre's sin was part of the fact was that they sold the Jews to Edom and to Greece. So when the captives were taken, they sold them off. We mentioned the prophecy about Tyre, and it was an amazing prophecy. Several things were mentioned about in this prophecy. It was mentioned that the nations would attack them in waves. It was mentioned that their walls and everything would be broken down. It was mentioned that everything they would be scraped like the top of a rock, and everything would be thrown into the sea. And it was mentioned that the area of Tyre would become a place for the spreading of nets. And that amazing prophecy was fulfilled. We mentioned the fact that Tyre was first attacked by Nebuchadnezzar when it was a mainland city. But before Nebuchadnezzar got there, many of the people of Tyre escaped out to an island of Tyre, and they built another city out there on the island. Of course, they took all their wealth and everything. Nebuchadnezzar came and did destroy the city of Tyre. He did knock down the walls and everything. But unfortunately, Nebuchadnezzar did not have a navy to go out and attack the island city of Tyre, where all the money was. Of course, it was several hundred years later that the second part of the prophecy was fulfilled. And that was Alexander the Great came. And of course, he could not get out to the island of Tyre as well. He didn't have a big enough navy. But what he did was he took all of the torn up walls and everything of the destruction of the old Tyre, and he threw it in the water. He scraped the dust from old Tyre and threw it into the water. And he built a causeway that went all the way out to the island, connecting it to the mainland. Then with his ships, along with some of his confederates, they fought against the city of Tyre and did eventually take it. And so we see several things about Tyre. We see that, yes, in fact, they were destroyed by multiple people, Nebuchadnezzar and Alexander the Great. We see that their walls were knocked down and they were thrown into the water, which was done by Alexander the Great. He scraped the dust, and today, the ancient city of Tyre is a place where there is actually a fishery there, and fishermen do spread their nets there. And so an amazing fulfillment of prophecy. In Ezekiel chapter 28, we have a continuation of Tyre, but in this case, we see some kind of symbolism used. We mention in Ezekiel 28, there is a mention of the prince of Tyre. And we mentioned that although it may have been talking about a literal prince of Tyre, it's definitely talking about the Antichrist, who will someday come and fight against the children of Israel. It also mentions the king of Tyrus, and that very specifically is Satan. And it mentions the fact that he was in Eden, the garden of God. It mentions that Satan was a created being. And something odd about Satan was that he had built-in musical instruments, which is probably why so many people fall to bad music. Then in chapter 29 through 33, we mentioned prophecies against Egypt. And of course, Egypt was a very proud country. God called Egypt, he actually illustrated them as a couple of different animals. He mentioned Egypt as the dragon of the Nile, which probably referred to the crocodile. And he also called Egypt a whale that was caught. And of course, he mentioned the fact that he was going to drag Egypt basically in from the sea, and anybody that helped support Egypt would also be dragged up with him. It was mentioned that Nebuchadnezzar did conquer Egypt, and they were in captivity for 40 years. Not as long as Israel was, but they were in captivity for 40 years. The prophecy mentioned that their land would be given up to strangers. And so, just like Tyre, they as well were parted out to strangers. And we mentioned the fact that Alexander the Great ruled over Egypt. We also mentioned that Cleopatra was not Egyptian, she was Greek, and she ruled over Egypt as well. We talked about Pharaoh. The prophecy said that his arm would be broken. And of course, all of Pharaoh's statues often show a flexed arm, and he was broken. God's prophecy to Egypt reminded Egypt that she was capable of falling. And God used the country of Assyria. He said, remember Assyria? It was a great nation. It was a great cedar, and I cut it down. And he mentioned, I will cut you down as well. Well, that is it. I apologize. I said through chapter 33. It's actually chapter 32. All right. So hopefully you will pay attention to these questions and do well on the quiz.